All right, so we're in the open. We're out in the open now. Excellent. We're just going to give people a couple of more minutes before we start. So just so everyone, very welcome to today's webinar on anti-dumping. Just so everyone is aware, we are recording this. So in case you don't want to be on the recording, now is the time to get off. But the idea is that we will record this and then post it on the website for everyone who either couldn't make it today or just those people who want an encore, which is very usual, especially when we have great presenters like today. Definitely worth watching more than once. Over at tprforum.org under previous webinars. All right. And so, Ben, how would you like to do this today? Introducing the, giving people, what time is it?
Well, I can.
2 more minutes?
Yeah, while we're waiting for people, maybe we can just quickly introduce the forum, because I think, looking at the list of attendees, I think there's some people who are here for the first time. So the Trade Policy Research Forum is a group that Hannah and I started about a year ago, actually about exactly a year ago. We aim to do one research webinar every month, taking a bit of time off for the northern summer. And what we'd like to do, you can see from the logo on the screen that it looks a little bit like a bridge. It looks specifically like the Sydney Harbour Bridge, which is a bit of a nod to my accent. But what we're trying to do is to build a couple of bridges. One is between research and policy making. So we like to have researchers presenting, as we have today, both talking about policy, but also talking about some new empirical research. But we want to turn that into something that people in the policy world can use. So that's one kind of bridge that we want to build. Another one is between the different parts of the trade policy community. So Hannah and I are both economists, but we like to welcome lawyers, political scientists, policy professionals, and really everyone involved in the trade policy process. Then, of course, we're trying to build some geographical bridges as well. That is between the sorts of brown bag seminars that many of us are used to in the European and North American university systems, to make that available to people in particularly low and middle income countries where they may not have access to that through their own universities. So that's what we're trying to do with the forum. We're active on LinkedIn. We've got about 1,000 members in our group on LinkedIn. If you'd like to join, please either just look for the group or you can find Hannah and myself and we'll happily add you. We've got a mailing list after this. So a day after the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to the mailing list. That's obviously the easiest way to stay in touch with everything that we're doing. And we're active on Twitter. We have a website, tprforum.org. As Hannah said, we post recordings of these webinars a few days after the event on tprforum.org. So if you want to go back and have another look, you are more than welcome to do so. And with that, I'll hand back over to Hannah.
All right, thank you so very much. First of all, welcome everyone to this webinar. We're super excited to be here to talk about anti-dumping with such distinguished experts. And I would also like to congratulate all of you who made it here today, because since there's stiff competition out there in the trade policy world, there's the World Trade Forum going on, and also Ambassador Tai is giving a speech at the Graduate Institute in Geneva right now. So don't leave us, don't leave us. I was just saying that that's going on, but since you're here, since you're doing anti-dumping, you guys are the true nerds, the few, the proud like us. And so we're thrilled to have you here today. We are running on a pretty tight schedule, and so we would, but that will not stop us from wanting to hear as much of you as possible. Ben and I, we bring in awesome speakers, but the forum is only as great as the people who join us. And so please be active in putting your questions in either the chat or the Q&A. Ben has a superpower of putting together great questions there, summarizing them, or the speakers can talk through them as we go. But that during this year, this is how we found to be the most efficient way to handle the time here. So also something that we've been doing this about for a year, and we think it's super great, and we would like to have you more involved. So if you're interested in helping out with the forum, especially since I'm in charge, if you're great at social media or websites and would like to spend an hour or two a month helping out, that would be great. Shoot us an email. Without further ado, I'm about to now introduce today's speakers, which is super cool. So we have Professor Maurizio Zanardi from the University of Surrey here to speak about anti-dumping, and he's the anti-dumping king. And he is also the reason that Veysel made it into anti-dumping. Professor Veysel Avsar at Texas A&M, because he was actually inspired by Maurizio's work when we got into this 15 years ago. So there's a bridge right there in the making. And this is how it happens, even before we were here. And so we're thrilled to have them both speaking today. I'm also going to plug, because Maurizio, so in case you guys have not seen or heard about the ETSG, the European Trade Study Group, I've asked him to pitch that a little bit, because it is an awesome resource and that you want to check out too. But so without further ado, because I'm so strict on time, I'm going to let Maurizio start with giving an overview of the area of anti-dumping. So go ahead. And thank you so much for being here, of course.
Thanks a lot. Let me share my screen and hopefully everything will work. Can you confirm that you see my slides? Okay, and then I'm good to go. And I should start right away, because I've been told that Anna is very strict with time. So it's a pleasure to be here today, talking about anti-dumping duties, building bridges with Veysel, although it made me feel a bit old, that reference to 15 years ago, but let's skip on that. And given that I'm not sure who is listening to this talk, I'll try to catch a few items related to anti-dumping, and then I'm happy to engage in as much conversation as possible afterwards. Now, as you may expect from an academic, I will have to start with a definition, but I'll try to keep it as light as possible. So what is anti-dumping? Well, it's a trade policy. It is allowed by the World Trade Organization. And basically, it is a policy to introduce protectionist measures to address unfair business strategies. And here I'm somewhat quote, what does unfair business strategy means? Possible explanation, very short, selling below fair value, which doesn't really answer what it means, because what is a fair value? But let me stop here with the formality. Let me use two quotes to try to be maybe a bit provocative in defining what is anti-dumping. So this is a great quote by Finger, another very famous academic studying anti-dumping, but back in 1993, basically wrote, dumping is whatever you can get the government to act against under the anti-dumping law. This is less of an academic definition, but I guess for the audience should give the sense of the freedom, the leeway, for a loss of better word, that governments, policymakers have from time to time, or maybe always, to make use of this administrative tool to provide protection to some firms. Finger was not the only one, even already in 1993, to highlight some issues, I would say, with anti-dumping. Here is another quote by Blonigan and Prusa, two other very well-known economists working for long on anti-dumping. Actually, they inspired my PhD into anti-dumping last century, let's say. And here is a quote, and you will have the reference later on, saying, anti-dumping has nothing to do with keeping trade fair. It is simply another form of protection. And maybe based on these two quotes, that explains why I've not spent so much time in giving you the formal definition of anti-dumping, because at the end of the day, most economists are convinced that the laws, and without disrespect to our legal scholars and colleagues, allow quite some leeway to policymakers and to businesses to play around in order to get some form of protection. And that's where I would say that the devil is really in the details. And here it is in the details for researchers. So I started my PhD last century. Veysel started it more recently. If there is any PhD students or researchers in the audience, Anti-dumping seems very niche, very technical, but there are plenty of dimensions to explore. If there are business partners involved, there is plenty for firms in the private sectors about anti-dumping. If there is anyone working for a government agency, policymakers, the devil is in the details also for policymakers, something that the Veysel paper will exactly speak to later today. What I mean is in the details. What does a fair value mean? Does it mean selling below cost? Does it mean selling abroad cheaper at home? Strictly speaking, these are unfair value strategy. But then the question comes, how do you compare prices? How do you compare the price of garlic in the EU versus garlic in China? And I'm not using garlic as just as an example because I'm Italian, we use garlic in our cuisine, but because at some point garlic was subject to anti-dumping duties in the European Union, just like a lot of steel, bicycles, or orange juice. And then thinking again of this idea of prices, how do we talk of a price in a non-market economy? And here I'm using a quote, non-market economy, very important when we refer to China. There's been a lot of discussion. If an economy is not a market economy, does price have a meaning? If prices do not have a meaning, what do we use to calculate anti-dumping? And that's basically go to the main issue of why then there is so much leeway in some sense to use anti-dumping policy. Even thinking, we were having just a chat with Veysel before here, talking about exchange rates. So in which currency is a trade taking place? Does it matter? Well, it does matter, because then if I have to compare prices between a yen and dollars or euro and dollars, then an exchange rate must be used. And which one do I use? The one at the start of the day, an average, which average, and so on and so forth. The other thing that is always very interesting to me, and sometimes is forgotten, is that we have to remember that anti-dumping should be an administrative procedure where it's individual firms that ask for protection, because apparently there is a dumping that is injuring their businesses. But at the end of the day, the decision to introduce measures is done by governments. And here you have this relationship between firms, government, political influence, economic influences, all playing at once. But is anti-dumping important? And what do we mean if we say, and I will claim that it is an important phenomenon? Well, here are some numbers, and you will see the sources in the reference list. If you are interested, these are all freely available data from the World Bank and from the World Trade Organization. Here is just a simple graph, the total number of anti-dumping cases from 1980 to 2020, clearly increasing a lot, but the devil is in the details. Who is doing more anti-dumping today compared to 1980s? I don't have the time to give you a quiz, so I give you the answer right away. If you split between what the nerds of anti-dumping will call traditional users, these are typically referred to be Australia, Canada, European Union, United States. Clearly in the 80s, these countries were the only countries doing anti-dumping. Nowadays, someone else has taken the lead, and countries like China and India are accounting for a vast majority of the anti-dumping that has been taking place in recent years, for sure in the recent decade. But at the same time, why do they do also a lot of anti-dumping? Because some of these countries have been targeted and are still targeted by an enormous amount of anti-dumping cases. China, for example, is the most frequently targeted country in anti-dumping in the last 10 years or so. Why is that? Well, let's not forget, China joined the WTO in 2001, is considered by and large non-market economy, which means that it's even easier to find evidence of large dumping margins. And there you go as a possible explanation of why then China is heavily targeted. Again, the devil is in the details. But beyond the numbers, why is anti-dumping important? Why are we here to talk today about it? Well, it is a very flexible tool for firms to request the protection, especially, and this is particularly important when, because of the commitments that countries have taken through the WTO, countries have very little space to use import tariffs to protect industries. And then you need a safety valve to let the pressure, the political pressure to go off, and anti-dumping is providing that safety valve. Maybe it's more than just a safety valve. And in that sense, then it's a way for government to release that pressure. Now, anti-dumping is very surgical in a way, because remember, it does not apply to all countries in the same way. Because for anti-dumping to take place, you have to target specific firms in specific countries that allegedly are dumping, are selling at an unfair value. It's not a tariff or even a safeguard that attacks all trade partners. This is very surgical up to individual firms in a given countries. Well, this is very interesting, but clearly, as you can imagine, give rise to a lot of freedom on the firm side and on the government side to adapt the system over time. But anti-dumping is a very poor substitute for international competition rules, because if we really want to discuss unfair business practices, do we think that there are no unfair business practices within the European Union? Most likely there are. Is there anti-dumping within the European Union? No, because we are in a single market. So how do we square the circle? Well, any unfair business practice in the EU or within a country is not addressed by anti-dumping, but by competition policy. Unfortunately, someone would say fortunately, we don't have a worldwide competition policy, and anti-dumping becomes a poor substitute to try to reach those same objectives. But anti-dumping is evolving. What does it mean made in a country anymore? If we think of, and let's think of China, is always the elephant in the room. If a product is exported from China, is it a Chinese product? Is the iPhone Chinese? No, but then anti-dumping needs to adapt to that. What is the role of multinational firms and global value chains? A possible topic of another forum. Global value chains. I mean, again, is the iPhone Chinese? No, but it's coming from China. So theoretically, we could, in the US or Italy or the United Kingdom, could introduce anti-dumping measures on the iPhone because it's a Chinese product. I leave it as a question mark. Interesting, I'm based in the United Kingdom, so I thought I could not finish my presentation without mentioning at least once Brexit. But Brexit is an example of the complexity of trade policy in a globalized world, relationship between anti-dumping and trade agreements. Until the UK was a member of the EU, clearly there was no anti-dumping policy between the UK and Italy, France, Germany, and so on. Now the United Kingdom has created its own authority to deal with anti-dumping policies. So what has happened? All of a sudden, there is a political barrier, and now we have a need of anti-dumping? Well, in a way, yes. Going back to what I was saying before, competition policy between the UK and the EU is not there anymore, and it is somehow supplemented, possibly by anti-dumping, but then also it is a safety valve that the UK can use when it comes to anti-dumping as a way to make some firms, some industry happy in specifically very difficult times. Is this anti-dumping is supposed to be a very administrative track? You file a petition, there is an investigation to find evidence or not of dumping, of injury, and so on and so forth. Is it really the case? Well, there are plenty of papers, and I'm not going to list them, that shows that there are significant political influences in the way in which these technical investigations are conducted and the decision to introduce or not anti-dumping measure is made. And so here there is something very relevant for policymakers to think about, for firms and businesses to think about, and for us researchers, so that most likely Veysel and I could give another webinar in 10 years' time, because I'm sure that we'll still be busy, unfortunately, but as academic economists, fortunately, discussing anti-dumping. And in fact, anti-dumping touches upon many aspects. Clearly, with the time that Anna has given me, I cannot even imagine to mention all these issues. But there are always more and more to come along. And so I was very happy when I was invited to talk about in this forum, and I read the paper by Veysel. I honestly didn't think of linking the anti-dumping policy to the way in which trade flows are financed. And I don't want to steal Veysel's spotlight, so I'm not going to say anything more, but for sure, a very interesting consideration. I will stop here. These slides will be online. Here are the references for the papers and the data sources that I mentioned, in particular as a researcher or as a private business. If you want to get a sense of how much, which product, which countries, please look at the data from the World Bank and the WTO. And to finish, hopefully on time, but I don't see Anna yet screaming at me, just one slide on the European Trade Study Group. It is a forum. We don't call ourselves even an association. It's a forum for academic discussion and research on international trade. Basically, the only thing that we do, although as a co-organizer is not a small thing, we organize every September a conference. It's 2.5 days in some places in Europe, where on average more than 300 papers, all on international trade matters, are presented. It is the largest conference in international trade in the world. Last September, we were in Ghent, and there were, if I check correctly the program, 4 papers discussing anti-dumping. It goes in fashions. There were years with 10, 15 papers on anti-dumping, years with 1 and 2. What is interesting is that if you're interested, all these papers are freely available for download from the website of the ATSG. So even if you don't think you can come or would like to come to the ATSG in person next year, and we will be in Groningen in the Netherlands, have a look, because there are plenty of resources of cutting edge research which is made available for free. And let me say, not only about anti-dumping. I stop here, Anna. I hope I kept it with schedule, and if anything, more time for question and answers.
Maurizio, that was perfect. Perfect topic, perfect timing, perfect selling of the ETSG. So if, in case you guys have not gone, I'm just going to tell a quick story of the first time I was there, which was really where I learned the value of staying on time. So it's actually you, Maurizio, who has enforced me on this. They have speed dating for papers. So 20 minutes in and out so that you can go between different panels at the same time. So, and at the last night of my first conference, I was back at the hotel room. I was actually sad that it was 360 days until the next year, which is usually not how we end conferences. We're usually in a hurry to get to the airport and get the hell out of there. But that's not what ETSG is like. So great presentation, great overview. You're such an excellent speaker, Maurizio. It's a pleasure to have you on. And I'm sure that a lot of people feel that way with me. I see people are a little timid on the question side. So what I'm going to suggest that we do is that we're going to jump right over to Veysel so that he gets 10 minutes to present his paper. And in the meanwhile, get busy in the Q&A sessions or in the Q&A box, people, because we want to get some conversations flowing here. So without further ado, Veysel, the floor is yours.
Can you see the screen? Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great honor actually for me to be in the same platform with you guys. Thank you, Hannah, Ben, and thanks, Maurizio, for an excellent presentation. The title of my study is Strict Trade Measures, Flexible Financing. Before proceeding, I should give credit to my co-authors, Gültekin Güllü and Nurgül Sevinç. And this study was supported by a generous grant from the Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey. So our basic research question is, does anti-dumping affect trade finance? Maurizio already gave a detailed information about anti-dumping. I'm going to talk about trade finance first, then its interaction with anti-dumping. So what's trade finance? Trade finance is the lifeblood for international trade. Any instrument that can facilitate the payment aspect of international trade can be classified as trade finance. Like insurance, like currencies, like liquidity, working capital, or letter of credit, or open accounts, or any product coming from the banks related to international trade is classified as trade finance. But in this paper's context, when I say trade finance, it means the payment methods in international trade. So what are the main payment methods in international trade? Actually, we have three main methods. We have many, but mainly they are prepayments, post shipments, and bank intermediation. In cash in advance method, basically you are paying for the deliveries first and receive it later. In open account transaction, delivery takes place first and the payment takes place later. And in the bank intermediation methods, mainly banks issue a letter of credit, which is sort of a guarantee for the seller from the bank to receive the payments after the delivery of the products. Actually, trade finance depends on many things, from the contract enforcement of the countries to interest rates, competitiveness, outside options. But I went into ITC of the United States, the International Trade Commission's website, and it states because of the competition in export markets, exporters who are reluctant to extend trade credit may lose a sale to their competitors. That's what it says. So their suggestion is, if you want to be competitive in the international market, you better offer some financing. Otherwise, you can lose your trade partners to other competitors. So that's important. The outside options, the competition is important. How is anti-dumping related to this competition? Well, anti-dumping is actually raises the prices of the imported goods. There is a relative price impact here because, as Maurizio stated, anti-dumping duties are not equally imposed to all product country combinations. There is a target product country combination and the price of that good goes up. That creates a relative price impact and a competitive impact for the third countries. Because if I'm exporting to you and your country imposes an anti-dumping duty against my products, now another country's exporter is actually having an advantage because of this duty, because now it's cheaper relatively to purchase from that country. So my hypothesis here is, if there is an anti-dumping protection, or if exporters face an anti-dumping protection, they may fall back on trade credit to ease the intensity in the export market. So basically, we expect more imports on trade credit when there is an anti-dumping protection imposed on the trade partners. So I'm using Turkish data actually, not because I'm originally from Turkey, because Turkey is one of the heaviest anti-dumping users in the world, and it has a great detailed trade finance data that I will discuss later. Turkey is a very interesting case in anti-dumping. But when you look at the products, these are randomly selected from Turkish anti-dumping database, and these are mostly mentioned products in the data. When you look at this slide, what do you see? Probably the initial reaction is, what are these? Like, we don't know any of them. These are not products a typical consumer adds to their consumer market, like consumer basket. These are very different products, but somebody buys them. Mainly firms buy them to produce another product other than bicycle tires. I don't really know what they are and how they are used. And God only knows how many times we just purchase bicycle tires. So when it comes to trade financing, this picture is more important in the sense that firms are going to buy these products, process them, make a finished product, sell them, collect the payments, and pay their trade partners in the international market. So trade financing is actually even more important for an importer, which is importing these kinds of products to produce another final product. So that's another anecdote to support the argument in the context of Turkey, why anti-dumping and trade finance may be related. How do I get the data? Like Maurizio said, probably one of the best trade data in the world is temporary trade barriers database. When you go to World Bank, you can freely download anti-dumping activities, see the initiation date, target countries, named products, the decision of the governments, the amount of duties, many other things about anti-dumping. We are really grateful to World Bank for supporting such a project for years so that we could all do our research on anti-dumping. When it comes to payment methods, we purchased this from Turkish Statistical Institute. And this data is the only data in the world that has disaggregated information on trade finance. So we have product, country, and year information for every single country. To give you an example, I can actually gather the information about how much cotton shirts were exported to Greece from Turkey in 2016 under letter of credit method, open account method, or cash in advance method. That's obviously a very rich data, and it really fits into our research because anti-dumping is a product country measure. Not only product, not only country, it's targeting a product country combination. So I promised Ben and Hannah, I'm not going to go into very technical details, but I'm going to talk about some econometrics. The empirical design is basically difference in difference model. And it's nothing more than estimating the impact of an anti-dumping dummy, which has a value of 1 after the years of the duty imposition. But like Maurizio said, the devil is in the details. You need a control group, a similar product country pairs that can be comparable to anti-dumping group. In other words, in terms of likelihood of receiving anti-dumping protection, 2 groups has to be the same. You cannot just download the product country combinations, put the anti-dumping dummies, and run a regression. You need a control group which is similar to our anti-dumping group. That's the challenge actually in any anti-dumping study. but the earlier studies in the literature have presented very good methods to create these control groups and have some unbiased estimates. Another challenge here is parallel trends. Parallel trends is basically, if our identification strategy is correct, then anti-dumping duties should not have any influence before the imposition. So there's no anticipation impact. That's what the assumption is. Well, other than that, when you have the control groups, and you can address the parallel trend, the rest of the econometrics is easy. We have a lot of robustness checks like maximum likelihood estimates. We have extensive set of fixed effects. We have placebo tests. We have exclusion of some samples. We actually focused only on China because 60% of Turkey's anti-dumping activity is China-based. So we all did a lot of robustness checks, but basically this is what I did. Control groups, we have two. We use all product country combinations under the duty imposed country industry HS4 category. HS4 here is the industry. Product is 6-digit, industry is at 4-digit. So if, let's say, Turkey imposed an anti-dumping duty on Chinese cotton shirts, then any product under that textile industry is classified as a control group because they are in the same industry. In the second one, we followed a more conservative approach and created the control groups based on propensity score matching. So for that, you estimate a logic model for the likelihood of receiving an anti-dumping protection using the covariates that can affect the likelihood of anti-dumping protection, and then create a control group based on propensity score. Finally, to test the parallel trend, you do this event study estimate to show that, so I can get my marker here, to show that anti-dumping duties have no impact on trade finance before their imposition here. Notice that they are not significant here. But as you deviate from the imposition of anti-dumping, this is the year that we have the imposition. There's a departure actually from 1% to 2%, 3% to almost 5%. So we see a good increase in the open account shares after the imposition of anti-dumping. Some listeners may say, you know what, 5% is a very little number, but it may mean millions of dollars of trade here in this context. So the conclusion is when countries impose anti-dumping duties, it affects the payment aspect of international trade. Our findings suggest that target countries' exporters extended more trade credit for the duty imposed products. In other words, we see more trade on open account method. So after the imposition of anti-dumping duties, these country product payers, duty imposed product payers, see around 4 percentage point greater increase in trade credit provision compared to their counterparts that didn't receive anti-dumping, but very similar to those who received anti-dumping protection. I think I kept my promise to keep it short and non-technical.
You most certainly did, Veysel. Congratulations on that, and on a great presentation and timing skills. We really, really, really appreciate it. Great paper. I love how we got to go today from the big picture and then into a very specific question. Now, I've had the honor of warming up with you guys in a previous session, so I'm actually going to, well, people are a little shy today. They have not overflowing us with questions just yet. So don't be shy, don't hold back. We want to hear from you. This is a forum, remember. In the meanwhile, I'm going to give the very first question. No, actually, in the meanwhile, I'm going to let Maurizio have a first crack at Veysel's paper, I think, summarizing a little bit there, and then I'm going to go to you. And then people, if you don't start posting questions, I'm going to let them go into technical issues. So if that isn't incentives enough to get your questions going, I don't know what is. All right, Maurizio, why don't you take it?
Thanks. I'm not going to repeat what Veysel said because I think he did a very clear, although without math and without numbers presentation. And I think a graph is worth 1,000 words, and that graph shows that there is an effect that is increasing. We can discuss if 5% is large or not, but is an important effect. To me, what is also interesting, and maybe Veysel can comment further on that, is to understand if anti-dumping causes this a shift, what does it mean for other firms? Because it's not that trade credit comes in infinite supply, and so it's just there, and now these importers are using it in order to compensate for the extra cost of anti-dumping. It means that someone else, some other firms in some other sector may not get it. So that's always the point in economics. There is no free lunch in economics. If those firms, because of anti-dumping, they get to ask and they obtain trade credit, then someone else that would have liked to have it did not. So again, the devil is in the detail. And what do we take out of this story from a policy perspective, from a more country-wide consideration? Is it good? It helps these sectors, these firms. Does it help the economy overall? So I was wondering if Veysel can share some thoughts about this bigger picture and the policy implications.
The policy implications here is anti-dumping is not only about dumping, as you said. You know, we already struggle with that. There is strategy there. There is politics there. There is retaliation there. There is a club there, right? I wish it was only about dumping. And people already talk about why anti-dumping is not simply about dumping and why it is somehow abused, right? I mean, when it comes to the financial aspect of it, 2008, 2009 crisis taught us something. When there's a financial meltdown, trade goes down, right? Followed by the imposition of duties. That's another, like a double-edged sword. So here, when you impose an anti-dumping duty and you actually create a problem for a trade partner who has been exporting to a country over years, because exporting is not an overnight thing, you know that. I'm exporting to, for instance, China. In textile, Turkey and China have been in a relationship for maybe 50, 60 years, right? I know people in textile business in Turkey, they have been importing from the same Chinese partner for many years, maybe decades. Now, an anti-dumping duty actually sort of changes the dynamics of that relationship, right? So when you impose that, and if it is not true, that also creates some extra disadvantage to those who cannot find financing, because most of the things are intermediate products in this regard. Let me also tell you another interesting story here. I was reading a Turkish newspaper talking about Turkish businessmen association in Turkey from textile complaining about anti-dumping duties imposed by Turkish government. So that's ironic, right? Because it's the Turkish government imposing the duties to protect the Turkish industry, Turkish textile industry. But they were saying in the news, well, you're protecting the Americans. When you go into details, it turns out that since most of the goods are intermediate products, now they are purchasing it from Americans, and they are not actually protecting the Turkish industry. They were indeed protecting them, right? So here, not only you are creating a problem for financing aspect of trade, not only because they have to fall back on trade credit and they have to find other forms of trade credit, they have to go to the banks, they have to get working capital. But other than that, by imposing duties on intermediate products, you're not actually protecting your own industry. Isn't that true, Maurizio?
Yes, I think you went to one of the crucial aspects of anti-dumping. And I don't know, I don't want to take, but there is a question that in a way speaks to that. The very first question that was for you, Veysel. Anti-dumping is supposed to protect domestic industry. So why do some domestic business associations complain about that? And that's the main issue. So anti-dumping, as I was saying, is about the firms taking the initiative, but not all firms in a country are on the same page with what they want to do. And here I'm mindful of a relatively older case in the European Union when Philips, the Dutch company, is suing a Chinese producer for light bulbs, but basically, sorry, Osram was suing against Chinese producer, but these were basically supplying Philips. So basically Osram and Philips, two big companies in Europe, were using anti-dumping to get at each other. And that's give a sense of why, although anti-dumping to be done, there must be a majority of firms in the sectors that support it. It creates so many discussions. They're very technical discussions. They don't reach the headlines of newspapers and most often not even of financial newspapers, but there is a big discussion. Also, if I impose anti-dumping on tires, as suggested in the list from Veysel, well, then the car producer will not be very happy. Is the car producer going to voice their concern? Who are they going to listen to? And that's where anti-dumping and the policy dimension becomes so interesting, because anti-dumping is really targeting to protect the domestic industry that is affected by dumping. And then there is this community clause in some laws here and there that says, well, but you should also check that the overall welfare, well-being of the country is not too much damaged. But at the end of the day, I always make the case, I'm an Italian, I was living in the United States. I would have loved if the Italian producers of pasta were dumping a lot of pasta in the United States and I could get it at a cheaper price. As consumers, we will all gain. 99%, possibly 99.9% of the economists will say that anti-dumping is better for the overall economy if we sum up all the losses in the consumers, but still we have it. And so those examples really speak of why within a sector, within a country, there are so many voices opposing anti-dumping and some other strongly wanting anti-dumping. And I stop here for a moment.
Another point is, some people may ask, why don't you see it in the United States from iron and steel industry? Because the intermediate imports of iron and steel industry is usually used in other sectors. But when it comes to textile, fibers are used within textile. That's also very interesting for textile. They are more complaining because their intermediate products are used within sector. There was a question in the chat saying whether I use the value of trade credit instead of the share, if I understand it correctly. Yes, I did. But the problem with using the value is that it creates a lot of observations with zero trade, because sometimes the value of open account transaction is simply zero. But we are dealing with that. We are actually using as an alternative in a couple of other papers of mine. I used the value and did some econometric tricks to actually correct for zero trades. But yeah, results are very similar. Obviously, the impacts are larger when you use the value of trade credit. And there was another question, Maurizio, saying, what if the quality of the good is low? What if the low price is just because of the quality of the good?
That's I don't know who posed the question. That's a very interesting question. In a way, my only possible answer is going back to one of the non-academic definition. What is dumping? Well, dumping is what you can get your government to act upon. How can we measure accurately quality? How do we not? That's an open question even in academic research, not let alone in actual investigations. But that's where really the mechanism of anti-dumping that conceptually is in principle defensible becomes very difficult to implement in real terms. And there I really understand the challenge for policymakers. Conditional on the system existing, how do we make the best use of it? Although best should be qualified. Quality is very difficult to define. Also many other practices. I mean, there is this famous case about some practices in the United States that the World Trade Organization keeps saying that they are illegal and the United States keep using them. I'm referring to zeroing for those very nerdy in the audience, but where really so many aspects play a role. So quality is important. How do you measure? Well, that's very difficult. How do you compare not only tires, but components for a memory chip? So which one is faster? Which one is lower? Which one is bigger? Which one is heavier? All technical aspects that matter once you have to put them into a computer machine. But how do you capture that? So, and that's why also anti-dumping is evolving. You know, once upon a time, it was easy, made in a country, made that everything was done in that country. It was a piece of item. Nowadays, what does made in mean? Well, it doesn't mean almost anything in many cases. Going back to the iPhone example, turn your iPhone if you have one, and you will see that it says assembled in China. But it doesn't say that it's made in China, because where is it? And then even it's assembled in China with pieces that come from all over the world. And that's why, going back to what Veysel was saying, yeah, you may protect the Turkish industry, but because the intermediate products come from all over, you may actually protect the foreign industry that you were thinking to target.
Yeah. And actually, Russian shoemakers complain a lot about the quality, because they're saying that, you know, we are not dumping, we are just producing low quality, like lower quality compared to Europeans. And obviously, we are going to sell it at a cheap price. So that definition of dumping about like products is problematic. What is a like product? You know, bicycle is not a bicycle. I mean, products are differentiated. So that's probably, I would say, the most problematic part of dumping definition here, the quality aspect.
Yeah, don't get me started on comparing Italian pasta with pasta made in the United States. Otherwise, we need another forum.
Yeah, I'm going to Italian restaurants. Don't worry.
Oh, I just love this conversation, and I love how this is usually, there's always something that people don't know before they start, and I love that we got to snowing into that, that the quality issue is so obvious for everyone who has their face right into it, but nobody else thinks about that. That's one of my favorite takeaways. I'm so happy to see that people are responding to the incentive of a threat of going into technical issues, and so that the questions are now coming in. But let me first give the floor to Ben.
Yeah, sure. Let me chip in. So I'm not an anti-dumping guy. I did my PhD with Patrick Messeller, who is an anti-dumping guy, but I actually didn't work on anti-dumping. So what I'm going to say, you know, is going to be less on point than the last conversation. But you know, let me ask Veysel a question first, and this is consistent with Hannah's threat of going into technical details. You know, one thing that interests me about the paper, sort of taking what Maurizio was talking about, and I think where some of the Q&A went. You know, we can see that anti-dumping duties are used very strategically. That is to say, firms make a decision that they're going to make a complaint, and then there's this investigation process. But, you know, I'm a big fan of Mike Finger, and I think he really hit the nail on the head with that, you know, saying that it's basically whatever you can get. So in the context of an event study or a DID study, you know, how can we be confident that the treatment that you're using, which is, I'm guessing, the imposition of duties, that it's exogenous and that we're not actually capturing sort of a feedback effect between, you know, market conditions on the one hand, driving finance, driving anti-dumping duties, and it all sort of, you know, what do you do to sort of tease out
the only thing I did to actually address this, that's a great question. Yeah. The only thing we did to address this question, this concern is the anticipation assumption. So we believe that there is no anticipation. Then one of my co-authors suggested actually, instead of using the imposition year, we use the investigation year as a starting point for our policy value, which is not a far-fetched idea because Maurizio would say also, there is a literature saying that even the investigations itself decrease the trade flows, even if they are withdrawn or non-affirmative. Imagine there's an anti-dumping investigation, which doesn't result in duty imposition, but we still see that there is a decrease in trade flows because of the investigation. So that's why we started from the investigation date to sort of not perfectly solve, but at 28, I will say, yeah, to just that concern. But if you ask me, is it 100% exogenous? Nothing is 100% exogenous, but sure, obviously that's one remedy that we could think about. Start from the investigation date to eliminate that anticipation effect. Starts from there. That's why we had these dummies 1 year before, 2 years before, 3 years before. We don't see that impact.
No, that
kind of a solution. That's kind of a solution. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, as you say, nothing's, you know, I mean, we're not in the kind of, you know, saintly world where we get to do this stuff through experiments, unfortunately. So, but you know, your answer does actually take me down a different direction that I was thinking about when you're speaking, which is, you know, DID studies are very useful for telling us what's going on in the data. But then a separate question is sort of identifying the economic mechanism that's in play. And so, you know, one question that I had, again, is not being an anti-dumping guy, is, you know, this switch in financing arrangements that we see, is that specific to anti-dumping, or is it something that we would see from any kind of trade policy? So if we were imposing regular tariffs, if we were imposing countervailing duties,
oh yeah, something that
would we see
something
the same
that we have to discuss in a technical presentation. There are a lot of controls there.
Okay.
You need the contract enforcement, for instance. If you're exporting to a country with very strong contract enforcement, your trade financing decision is going to be very different because you trust their courts. When you extend trade credit, it's a risk for you. And the enforcement takes place in the destination. So you have to control for that. Does other trade policy affect trade financing? Absolutely. Free trade agreements, tariffs, regular tariffs, maybe quotas. You have to control for that. What about interest rate and the cost of financing? Same. What about other issues on bargaining power? Because extending trade credit depends on outside options and your bargaining power. Think it this way. When it comes to China, most of the imports of Turkey comes from China. But when you go into Chinese statistics, Turkey doesn't even register, right? So Chinese know that they're always buying from us. That gives them some advantage because it's cheap fabric, mostly textile. When you go to Turkish anti-dumping activity, it's Chinese textile, like two words, China and textile, mainly. I would say more than 60%. So an intermediate product. So basically, there is a lot of factors to consider. It has to be controlled and to isolate the economic impact of anti-dumping. You were right. But you know, another policy implication here is that in 2009, I think countries extended $250 billion, the G9 countries, to facilitate international trade because there was a meltdown in trade finance. And then there was also a rise in temporary protection. These are unconventional trade measures. So the policy implication here is, well, we have trade measures, and then even if you just extend some trade credit, that sort of offsets. You see what I mean? So you need more support when there is more temporary protection going around. But yeah, like you said, the economic impact economic impact of anti-dumping has to be identified after controlling for many other factors on trade finance.
Yep, Mike, that makes total sense. And as you say, in a technical setting, we'd get into all of these sort of weeds in a lot more detail. Let me maybe switch to Maurizio for just a policy question. Something that occurred to me when you showed that graph with the increase in anti-dumping use over time, and you've got the traditional users, the non-traditional users. One question that I have is, if you're a country that has just set up its anti-dumping arrangements or is thinking of doing so, presumably you can learn a lot from the experience of what has gone on, for better or for worse, in the traditional users, and even the sort of research that we've seen here today. And I'm conscious that you're in a country that has just set up its own anti-dumping arrangements following Brexit. So what would you say are the important things for government to keep in mind if they're either thinking of or just in the process of setting up an anti-dumping authority, anti-dumping legislation?
That's a very good question. I mean, first of all, anti-dumping laws are quote easy to implement if you want. There is a general anti-dumping agreement from the WTO. Many developing countries that have introduced anti-dumping, they basically copy and paste parts of the US anti-dumping law or the European anti-dumping law and so on and so forth. The case of the UK is slightly different because there is still a relationship to manage with the European Union, from which quote we are inheriting anti-dumping cases, and now the UK trade authority is deciding which ones of those that we will be inheriting we want to keep and which others not. To me, if a country is thinking now of introducing an anti-dumping law, try to resist the temptation to do as much copy and paste, because as I was saying, anti-dumping is evolving. The issue that we discussed of global value chains, multinational, what does it mean? So the trade as formally a product arriving in a port and being moved on a truck is very different than what it meant 30 years ago. So to me, really is a thinking about the concept of trade in a globalized economy. And that's where I will really put the finger. The other thing to keep in mind is that, as with everything almost in international trade, there are substantial redistributional issues here. You help an industry, you help a firm in one sector, a problem will pop up somewhere else. So what do you do now? You start trying to push down all the possible things that come up. So think of the interactions that are taking place. The other thing, since you mentioned, there is clearly a lot of learning by doing on the part of the firms in a given industry and also on the part of governments. So for sure, there is a learning that has to take place, and that's also very important. And finally, I will go back to an old thing, I think that I've said more than once, the devil is in the details. So going back to a question and then an answer by Veysel, there are preliminary measures that can be introduced and then they have to be confirmed or not within a certain period of time. These preliminary measures are already displaying significant trade effects. Even simply filing the anti-dumping case, even if nothing happens, it can create a substantial trade disruptions. And we know that already trade flows sometimes are very lumpy. 1 month yes, 1 month no, you burn this at export relationship. These are very costly. So don't ever underestimate the details of what has been done in these situations.
Yeah, I think those are all great points, and indeed, there's some material in the Q&A there. I think there are some practitioners or people who've had experience in practice in the room, and so there are just some notes there about various aspects of how the investigation works, preliminary measures, all those sorts of things. I think that's really crucial. Let me ask maybe just one last question to round it out. Conscious that we're getting pretty close to the hour. And that's this question of GVCs that's come up, and I'll pose it to both of you because I'm sure that you've both got a view on it. Where does the research sit on, not just anti-dumping, but more broadly tracing the impacts of trade policy through a global value chain? Because as you were saying, Maurizio, when you've got this kind of point-to-point transaction that's straightforward, you take a tariff rate, you take an anti-dumping duty, figuring out what the welfare implications are is a relatively sort of straightforward problem. But how do we do that with something like an iPhone, where we've got all these different stages of production, we've got inputs coming from all over the place? And of course, from anti-dumping, from the point of view of the authority, there's a perspective of wanting to do something for a group of national producers, and maybe you end up getting it wrong if you don't do that calculation right. And of course, from a welfare perspective, there's the idea of not wanting to shoot yourself in the foot. That is to say, doing something that you think is in the national interest when actually you're undermining your producers. So from a research standpoint, what do we know about how to try and tease these effects out? Maurizio, maybe I can go to you first, and then Veysel, I'll turn over to you for the last word.
Actually, Maurizio just published about that. Just published last month, I guess, right?
Yes. And thanks, Veysel. Yes, and that's really the frontier for academic research, but not only. And it's only thanks to better data that now we can start to scratch the surface. So thanks to Veysel for mentioning, I just published a paper where we see that, for example, anti-dumping measures are more likely to be removed if the product is used extensively in global value chains, because basically when I tax this product coming in, I'm basically taxing my own export that went to that country, were manipulated, and are coming back to me. So there are a lot of feedback effects. The problem is that here we have to rely on data. And that's where our next challenge is. We need the trade authorities also to move along with times. There are already some very good data sets, but more is needed to understand what does constitute a product, which value added is added versus assembling. And that's where then also from an academic perspective, and therefore helping practitioners and policymakers, we can advance in this dimension.
Great. Veysel, do you want to chip in on that as well?
I'm assuming I'm going to follow up with another question, because anti-dumping is also very related to lobbying. Domestic producers lobby for protection. So with the impact of GVCs and anti-dumping law introduced by Maurizio, are we going to see more foreign people going into countries to lobby for their GVCs? So are we going to see some Italians going to Turkey and lobby there, or to UK or to China, just like a Chinese lobbying for protection in China?
This is a very interesting question. I mean, I believe that at least formally in the United States, there cannot be lobbying from foreign entity, although we know that then there is a lobbying taking place. But that it's like when I tell my students when I was teaching in the European Union, if you have a complaint, where do you go? And you don't go to Rome, you don't go to Paris. You have to, first of all, have to fly to Brussels. That's where then either at a technical level or at a diplomatic level, as Veysel was saying, then things will get moving. So yes, lobby your person in Rome, but make sure to also catch a flight to go to Brussels. I guess that in the US, you will have to go to Washington, DC sooner rather than later.
Makes a lot of sense. Thanks, guys. I mean, there's so much that came out of that discussion. So, you know, I learned really a huge amount. Sorry.
One last thing I want to say to the audience. Anti-dumping duties are drastically large and they have huge impacts on trade flows. If they want to have one takeaway from this presentation, they are not like tariffs, they are huge. That's why we see dramatic decreases in trade flows. They may say, who cares about anti-dumping? It only targets a small group of products, but their impact is huge. That's why we all write about anti-dumping, something that needs to be mentioned before leaving.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great note to end on. I don't know, Hannah, do you want to wrap up on that note?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I love that. Because I knew that I was going to ask, you know, what's the big policy takeaway here? Because this webinar has been completely awesome, not just because we have awesome panelists here, but it turns out that we have people from every part of the anti-dumping community right here. And so I don't know where else we could have gotten that. Practitioners and researchers and politicians or policymakers here. So I think that that is a very cool concoction there of people, which I don't know otherwise where we would have been able to put that together. So first of all, thank you so much everyone for joining. Thank you Maurizio and Veysel for presenting, and Ben for hopping on this crazy train with me a year ago. Let's not make it over right yet. So please, I think both Maurizio and Veysel are happy to connect with everyone if you reach out to them on LinkedIn. They're both on there. So make sure that you reach out and link in, continue the conversation. Why don't you do it within our group? There's about 1,000 people in our group. So why don't we continue this conversation, have it roll around there for a while and learn from each other. Sign up for the group, sign up for the webinars. Also, please make sure that if you have suggestions for either topics or speakers and that you want us to cover, let us know. I will cold call anyone at any time and ask for people to come on here and talk to us. And we already have the November webinar set, right, Ben?
Yep, so there's a flyer up there doing a bit of a push for our November webinar. Everyone who's attended today and even those who missed will get an email from Zoom with the sign up link for the next webinar. We're going to be talking about gender mainstreaming in trade. So change of pace from anti-dumping, but looking specifically at the inclusion of gender relevant provisions in trade agreements. We've got two great presenters, Amrita Bari from ITAM in Mexico and Jose Antonio Montero from WTO, who've both done work kind of directly on the topic, some of the cutting edge research. So it should be a really interesting conversation. If you can, please do come and join us. It's on November the 18th at, again, 9 a.m. Eastern time in the US.
So thank you everyone for being here today, and please keep in touch. You know, the forum is only as great as we are all together. So see you soon. And the recording and everything will be up in the next few days on the website, as soon as I wrangle my adolescents on to do it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks everyone. Thanks for inviting me.
Bye.
Bye.